Have you ever wondered what words remain unspoken between parents and children? What secrets die with our loved ones forever sealed in silence? For 48 years, Emily Warner believed she knew her father, a quiet Vietnam veteran who rarely spoke about his past. She grew up filling the gaps in his story with her imagination, creating a version of him that made sense to her. But what if everything you thought you knew about someone was just the surface of a much deeper truth? What would you do if, years after they're gone, you discovered they had left behind a message meant only for you, when you were ready to hear it? This is the story of a small cassette tape hidden among war medals and old photographs, and how a father's voice, preserved for 4 decades, would finally tell the truth that could never be spoken in life. Are you ready to hear it? The suburban home in Lancaster, Pennsylvania stood exactly as Emily remembered it. The peeling white paint on the porch railing, the creaking third step, and the brass knocker her father had polished every Sunday for 40 years. Standing on the threshold with a set of old keys in her hand, Emily felt like an intruder in the place she once called home. It had been 3 weeks since the funeral. Colonel Robert Warner had passed away quietly in his sleep at 76, a peaceful end for a man whose youth had been defined by the chaos of Vietnam. In life, he had been a paradox, meticulously organized yet emotionally distant, a decorated soldier who flinched at the sound of fireworks, a father who loved his daughter fiercely but could never find the words to tell her why tears sometimes streaked his face when he thought no one was looking. "Just like your dad," the neighbors would say when Emily showed determination or precision in her work. But she had always wondered how much of him she truly knew. Now, tasked with emptying the house before it went on the market, Emily was about to discover just how little she understood about the man who raised her. As she stepped inside, the familiar smell of Old Spice and wood polish enveloped her. She didn't know that buried among her father's possessions lay the truth he had been waiting 40 years for her to hear. And that by nightfall, everything she believed about their shared history would change forever. Emily began in the living room, methodically sorting through decades of her father's life. Books were boxed for donation, furniture tagged for an estate sale, and personal items separated for later consideration. The process was clinical until she reached his study, the sacred space where she had rarely been allowed as a child. The heavy oak desk dominated the room, its surface immaculate even in his absence. She ran her fingers along the edge, remembering how he would sit there for hours, sometimes staring at nothing, other times meticulously arranging his military memorabilia. Her father had been a man of routine, each item in its proper place, a habit formed in the jungle, he once mentioned, where disorder could mean death. "Okay, Dad," she whispered to the empty room. "Let's see what you've been keeping in here." The desk drawers contained what she expected: perfectly aligned pens, alphabetized files, service records. It wasn't until she reached the bottom drawer that something unusual appeared: a metal ammunition box, olive green and weather-worn, with faded lettering stenciled on the side: W.C. 25th Infantry. Emily lifted it onto the desk, surprised by its weight. Unlike everything else in her father's immaculate home, this box bore the marks of another time: scratches, dents, and what appeared to be burn marks along one edge. Her hands trembled slightly as she released the latches. Inside, carefully arranged, lay her father's military life: medals in velvet cases, dog tags on a tarnished chain, faded photographs of young men with haunted eyes and forced smiles. She recognized her father among them, thinner, younger, with none of the gray that had defined him in her lifetime. Beneath these treasures was something unexpected: a small cassette recorder, the kind popular in the 1970s, with a single tape inside. Attached to it was a yellowed note in her father's precise handwriting: "For Emily, When you're ready. Her breath caught. When was this recorded? And what did he mean by ready? She had been an adult for decades. Why had he never mentioned it? Emily placed the recorder on the desk, hesitating. There had always been boundaries with her father. Topics not discussed, questions not asked. After her mother died from cancer when Emily was 8, those boundaries had only strengthened, creating a relationship built on respect and routine rather than emotional connection. Outside, thunder rumbled as a spring storm approached. The old house creaked around her, as if encouraging her decision. With trembling fingers, Emily pressed the play button. Static crackled, followed by a throat clearing. Then her father's voice, younger, less weathered than she remembered, but unmistakably his, filled the room. "Emily, if you're listening to this, I'm gone and you're finally going through my things." A pause, then a soft chuckle. "Knowing you've already organized everything alphabetically." Tears sprang to her eyes at this unexpected glimpse of humor. Her father continued, his voice growing serious. "I'm recording this in 1983. You're 8 years old, sleeping down the hall, and tomorrow marks 1 year since we lost your mother." His voice cracked slightly. "I've realized something tonight that scares me. You're starting to forget her. You asked me today what color her eyes were." Emily's hand flew to her mouth. She had no memory of this. "I'm not good with words, Emmy. Never have been. Vietnam taught me to keep things inside. It was safer that way. But watching you grow up without your mother, without knowing the truth about what happened, I can't let that stand." The tape hissed with a moment of silence. "So I'm making this recording. Not for you now, but for when you're ready to hear it. There are things about your mother, about me, about what really happened when I was overseas. Things you deserve to know. I just hope that when you finally hear this, you can find it in your heart to understand why I kept them from you for so long." The recording paused, and Emily realized she was holding her breath. Outside, rain began to fall as her father's voice continued from 40 years in the past. "I was drafted in 1969. Her father's voice continued from the small speaker. "I was 22, engaged to your mother with plans to finish college." None of that mattered to Uncle Sam. Emily settled into her father's chair, rain pattering against the windows as she listened. This was a story she knew only in fragments. Occasional comments at Veterans Day parades or rare unguarded moments when he'd had a drink too many. "They sent me to Cu Chi with the 25th Infantry. The jungle was, well, it wasn't like anything they prepared us for. Not the heat, not the sounds, not the constant fear." His voice grew distant as if he were seeing it again. "But this recording isn't about the war, Emmy. It's about what happened after, what I never told anyone, not even your mother." Emily leaned forward, her heart racing. Her father had always been a closed book about Vietnam. What confession had he been holding on to all these years? "When I came home in 71, I wasn't right. They didn't call it PTSD back then, just combat fatigue or shell shock. Some guys drank, some disappeared into themselves. Me, I couldn't sleep without checking the perimeter of our apartment 3 times a night. Couldn't handle crowds, jumped at backfiring cars." A long pause followed, filled only with the sound of her father's measured breathing. "Your mother, Sarah. She was patient beyond what any man deserved. She'd talk me down from nightmares, never complained when I'd wake her at 3 a.m. to make sure the doors were locked. She loved me through the worst of it." Emily wiped away tears. Her memories of her mother were hazy at best. A flowery perfume, soft hands, a musical laugh. She had died when Emily was so young that her father had become her entire world. "The doctors gave me pills. Lots of them. They helped with the anxiety but turned me into a zombie. I hated who I became on them, so sometimes I'd stop taking them. That's what happened the night of March 15th, 1982. The date hit Emily like a physical blow. March 15th, her mother's birthday. I'd been off my medication for 3 weeks, thought I was doing better. Your mother wanted to celebrate her birthday with friends, just a small dinner at the house. I said I could handle it. His voice tightened. I was wrong. Rain hammered harder against the windows as her father described the evening, how the sudden sound of a champagne cork had triggered a flashback, how he'd dropped to the floor thinking he was back in the jungle, how he'd lashed out at someone trying to help him, not realizing it was her mother. I didn't hit her hard, he said, voice breaking, but she fell, hit her head on the corner of the coffee table. Everyone said it was an accident, and legally that's what it was. But I knew the truth, Emmy. I was the reason she fell, the reason she developed that blood clot that took her from us 2 weeks later. Emily sat frozen, the world tilting around her. All these years, she'd believed her mother had simply fallen ill, that a sudden brain aneurysm had claimed her life. Never once had she suspected her father carried this burden of guilt. The official story was easier for everyone, especially you. How do you tell an 8-year-old that her father's broken mind contributed to her mother's death? So I created a new version of myself, structured, controlled, never losing grip. I built walls between us because I was terrified of hurting you too. The tape fell silent for several seconds. When her father spoke again, his voice was steadier. But that's not the only secret I've kept from you, Emily. There's something else. Something about your mother that you have a right to know, and to understand it, you'll need to find what she left for you. After the funeral, her father's voice continued, I couldn't bear to look at your mother's things. But she was always more organized than me, always planning ahead. A soft, sad chuckle crackled through the speaker. She knew, Emmy. Somehow, she sensed she wouldn't always be there for you. Emily wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold despite the spring warmth seeping through the windows. The rain had softened to a gentle patter, almost rhythmic against the roof. In the tool chest in the attic, behind the winter blankets, there's a metal box. The key is taped to the bottom of this recorder. Your mother left letters for you, one for each significant moment she thought she might miss. Your high school graduation, your wedding day, the birth of your first child. With trembling fingers, Emily turned over the recorder. Sure enough, a small key was taped to the underside, the adhesive yellow with age. How had she never known about these letters? How had she lived her entire adult life without this connection to the mother she barely remembered? I read only one, her father admitted. The envelope marked, when she asks about me. Inside, Sarah, your mother made me promise 2 things. To tell you the truth when you were old enough to understand, and to give you her letters when the time was right. Emily closed her eyes, imagining her mother penning these messages, a young woman facing her mortality, desperately trying to extend her presence into her daughter's future. I failed at the first promise, her father said, his voice heavy with regret. I never found the right moment to tell you the truth about that night. But the second promise, her letters, they're still waiting for you exactly where she left them. The recording continued as her father explained how, over the years, guilt had become his constant companion, how he'd thrown himself into raising Emily with military precision, not out of coldness but out of fear that any emotional vulnerability might unleash the demons he worked so hard to contain. I watched you graduate college from the back row, too choked up to join the other parents congratulating their kids. Sat alone at your wedding reception, unable to give the toast I'd rehearsed for weeks because I couldn't trust my voice. Always holding back, always maintaining control. Emily remembered those moments differently. Her stern father, who rarely showed emotion, who seemed uncomfortable at celebrations, who maintained a respectful distance even during life's biggest milestones. She had interpreted his reserve as disapproval or discomfort. Never once had she imagined it was because he felt too much, not too little. The hardest letter to keep back was the one marked for her wedding day. He continued, "I almost gave it to you then, but the envelope had your mother's handwriting, her fingerprints, maybe even her tears on it. I wasn't ready to let that piece of her go. Selfish, I know." The cassette whirred softly as her father fell silent for several seconds. 2 months ago, the doctors found the cancer, stage 4 already in my liver. They gave me 6 months, but I know it'll be faster. I can feel it. His voice sounded tired now, but resolute. That's why I'm finally fulfilling my promise to your mother. When I'm gone, you'll find this recording and through it her letters. It's time for both of us to stop hiding behind the walls I built. The direction was clear. Emily rose from the chair, recorder in hand, and made her way to the narrow staircase leading to the attic. Each step felt like crossing a threshold into the past. Not just her past, but her parents' past, a history more complex and heartbreaking than she had ever imagined. As she pushed open the attic door, dust motes danced in the beams of late afternoon sunlight. Her father's voice followed her, guiding her toward the final piece of a puzzle, 40 years in the making. The attic was precisely as Emily remembered, meticulously organized despite its function as a storage space. Clear plastic bins lined one wall, each labeled with her father's block handwriting. Christmas, Emily's school, tax records. In the far corner stood the battered tool chest her father had mentioned, its dark green paint chipped along the edges. Her father's voice continued from the recorder she carried. "The box is behind the winter blankets in the bottom drawer. Your mother painted yellow daisies on the lid, her favorite flower." Emily knelt before the tool chest, setting the recorder beside her. The bottom drawer slid open with a groan of protest, revealing neatly folded quilts and blankets. Her hands shook as she moved them aside, revealing a metal box roughly the size of a shoebox, adorned with hand-painted daisies just as her father had described. "I had asked Sarah to leave you messages in case..." His voice faltered. "In case her cancer came back. We knew her type was hereditary, that there was a chance. But she expanded on my request, wrote dozens of letters for every occasion she could think of." Emily inserted the small key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, as if it had been recently oiled. Inside lay a collection of envelopes, each labeled in elegant handwriting she recognized from birthday cards preserved in her childhood scrapbooks. Sweet 16, college graduation, wedding day, first child, when you're scared, when you need your mother. The occasions ranged from specific milestones to emotional states, each anticipated by a woman determined to mother her child beyond the grave. But atop these letters lay one marked simply, "The truth about your father." "There's one letter I never mentioned," her father's voice said, with timing so perfect it sent chills down Emily's spine. "One I only discovered after her death, addressed to you, but really meant for both of us." With trembling fingers, Emily opened this envelope. Inside was a single sheet of pale blue stationery, the ink slightly faded but still clearly legible. "My darling Emily," it began. "If you're reading this, then you finally learned the truth about the accident. First, know this. I never blamed your father, not for a moment." Tears blurred Emily's vision as she read her mother's words, graceful, loving words that absolved her father of the guilt he had carried for decades. Her mother described the accident from her perspective, How she had seen the terror in her husband's eyes during his flashback. How she had moved toward him despite others warning her to give him space. "I chose to approach him," Sarah had written. "I knew the risks of loving a man haunted by war. That night, both of us were victims. Your father of his trauma and me of terrible timing and gravity. What happened was an accident in the truest sense with no blame to assign." The letter continued, explaining that she had anticipated her husband's reaction, his tendency to assume responsibility, to punish himself, to create emotional distance as protection. "My greatest fear," Sarah wrote, "is not death itself, but that he will use this tragedy to wall himself off from you, to deny himself the joy of being fully present as your father. If he has done this, and knowing Robert he has, then I am entrusting you with a mission. Forgive him, even if he cannot forgive himself." As Emily read, her father's recorded voice provided a parallel narrative, explaining how he had discovered this letter years after his wife's death, hidden among her personal papers. "I found it on your 21st birthday," he admitted. "It broke something in me, Emmy. To know she had foreseen my reaction so perfectly, had forgiven me before I even had the chance to ask for forgiveness. But by then, the pattern was set. The walls were built. I didn't know how to tear them down without collapsing entirely." Emily clutched the letter to her chest, her mother's words and her father's voice intertwining across time. A conversation 4 decades in the making, with her caught in the middle as both subject and witness. "The truth is, I was a coward," her father concluded softly. "Not in Vietnam, there. I did my duty. But with you, I failed to show the courage your mother showed every day of her brief life. The courage to love completely, even knowing loss was possible." Outside, the storm had passed. Golden evening light streamed through the attic window as Emily sorted through her mother's letters, organizing them chronologically. Some had already missed their moments, advice for her teenage years, guidance for college decisions. Others still waited for futures that might never come. She was divorced, childless at 48. Her life having taken unexpected turns. Her father's voice had fallen silent. The tape had ended after his final confession, leaving Emily alone with her mother's words and her own conflicted feelings. She picked up an envelope marked "When You're Angry at Him" and carefully opened it. Inside, her mother had written, "Darling girl, if you're reading this, your father has done something that feels unforgivable. Before you harden your heart against him, remember this. The man I married contained multitudes, incredible strength alongside profound vulnerability. The war took parts of him he'll never get back, but what remains is still worthy of love. His greatest fear was always failing the people who depended on him. Whatever he's done, I guarantee he's punishing himself more severely than you ever could." Emily wiped away tears, recognizing the truth of these words. Her entire childhood, she had interpreted her father's emotional distance as disappointment or indifference. How different might their relationship have been if she had understood the true battle he was fighting, not against her, but against himself. She descended from the attic with the box of letters and returned to her father's study. The ammunition box still lay open on the desk, his military life displayed in neat rows. On impulse, she reached for his dog tags, running her thumb over the embossed information. Warner, Robert J. ABPOS, Methodist. A slip of paper tucked beneath the remaining items caught her eye. She carefully extracted it, a faded photograph of her parents she had never seen before. They stood before a justice of the peace. Her father in his dress uniform, her mother in a simple white dress, both beaming with youthful hope despite the shadow of Vietnam looming over them. On the back, her mother had written, The day we chose love over fear. May 2nd, 1969. 2 weeks before he shipped out, they had moved their wedding forward, choosing a courthouse ceremony over the church wedding they had planned, refusing to let war dictate the timeline of their love. Beside the photo lay one final unexpected item: a small velvet box. Inside was her mother's engagement ring, a modest diamond in a vintage setting, alongside a note in her father's handwriting. For Emily to remember that some loves survive everything, even death and sons. I should have given this to you years ago. Another failure to add to my list, the pieces aligned in Emily's mind. Her father's annual Memorial Day visits to the cemetery with fresh daisies. His refusal to date after her mother's death. The way his eyes always lingered on the single photograph of Sarah that he kept on his nightstand. For 40 years, he had remained faithful to a ghost, his heart buried alongside her. Emily slipped her mother's ring onto her finger, surprised to find it fit perfectly. In that moment, something shifted inside her. A lifetime of misunderstandings suddenly recontextualized. Her stern, distant father transformed in her memory into a man crippled by grief and guilt, a man who had loved too deeply and feared that same depth of feeling. She gathered the letters, the photograph, and the cassette recorder, placing them carefully back in the ammunition box alongside her father's military honors. These were different kinds of medals, awards for battles fought not in jungles but in the quiet rooms of a Pennsylvania home, where a broken man had done his imperfect best to raise a daughter alone. Tomorrow she would begin the process of properly going through her father's belongings. But tonight, under the same roof where she had grown up, Emily would read her mother's words by lamplight and finally come to know both her parents as they truly were: flawed, loving, human. 3 months later, Emily stood in Arlington National Cemetery, her father's ammunition box tucked under her arm. After extensive paperwork and special permissions, Colonel Robert Warner was being laid to rest with full military honors beside his brothers in arms. The day was clear, the ceremonial rifle volleys sharp against the blue sky. As taps played its haunting melody, Emily thought not of the soldier being honored, but of the father she had finally come to understand. In the months since discovering the cassette tape and her mother's letters, Emily had embarked on an unexpected journey of reconciliation. She had read every letter, sometimes laughing, often crying, as her mother's voice reached across decades to guide her. Through Sarah's words, Emily had found the father behind the rigid exterior. The man who had checked her bedroom door was locked every night until she left for college, who had kept every report card and drawing in meticulous files, who had loved her with a fierceness matched only by his fear of showing it. As the honor guard folded the flag from her father's casket, Emily wore her mother's ring and carried in her heart the understanding that had come too late for her father to witness: complete forgiveness. That evening, as the cemetery emptied of mourners, Emily placed a single yellow daisy on each of her parents' graves. They were together now, the secrets and silences between them finally dissolved. "I understand now," she whispered to them both, "and I'm ready to live without walls of my own." In the gentle breeze that stirred the flowers, Emily felt at last the embrace of both her parents, together, complete and at peace.